husband called me useless. Then he found out what my father really left me. The words still echoed in my mind long after my husband walked away. "You're useless," he had said it casually, almost as if he were commenting on the weather. But I knew exactly what he meant to him. I had become a burden, someone who stayed home, handled the house, supported him, and somehow still failed to do enough. I stood in the kitchen that evening, staring at the untouched dinner I had prepared for us. My hands were trembling, but I refused to cry. For years I had believed marriage meant standing beside someone through everything. When my husband Daniel lost his job, I supported him. When he started his business, I encouraged him when money was tight. I quietly gave up the things I wanted so he could chase his dreams. But somewhere along the way, Daniel stopped seeing me as his partner. He started seeing me as someone beneath him. "You don't contribute anything," he had told me many times. I never argued, not because he was right, because I knew something he didn't. My father had left me something that would eventually change everything. My father, Robert, had been a quiet and hard-working man. He never showed off his wealth. Even our relatives had no idea how successful he had become. He owned several properties, had investments in different companies, and had built a small manufacturing business from nothing. But Dad never raised me to depend on money. He always told me a person should learn to stand on their own feet, even when someone else offers to carry them. When he passed away, I was devastated. Daniel attended the funeral, hugged me in front of everyone, and acted like the perfect husband. Behind closed doors, however, he asked one question: "How much did your father leave you?" I remember looking at him in disbelief. "My father just died, I know." He replied, "I'm just asking because we have bills." I didn't tell him, not then. A few weeks after the funeral, my father's lawyer contacted me. He asked me to come to his office alone. When I arrived, he placed a thick folder on the table. "Your father planned carefully. He said he wanted you to receive these assets, but he also created conditions to protect them from anyone who might try to control you." I opened the folder. Inside were property documents, investment statements, company ownership papers, and a letter written in my father's handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. "My daughter," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to protect you. But I hope you remember that you were never meant to live your life trying to prove your worth to anyone." I stopped reading for a moment because tears filled my eyes. Dad continued, "Some people will love you for who you are. Others will love what they think they can get from you. Learn the difference." The lawyer explained that my father had left me ownership, interest worth millions, several rental properties, and control of a family investment company. But there was one thing that surprised me most. Dad had specifically instructed that none of the assets could be transferred to my husband without my direct approval. He had anticipated that someone might pressure me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I simply wanted to grieve. But months later, Daniel changed. His business began struggling. He started coming home angry. He blamed everyone except himself. One night, he threw a stack of bills onto the table. "We're drowning," he shouted. "We'll figure it out," I said. "You'll figure it out." He laughed bitterly. "What do you even do?" I stayed silent. Then he looked directly at me. "You're useless." Something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It simply became clear. I had spent years trying to earn respect from a man who had already decided I wasn't worthy of it. The next morning, I went back to my father's lawyer. "I want to know exactly what I own." He smiled gently. "I was wondering when you would ask." Over the next several weeks, I learned the truth about my father's legacy. The rental properties generated substantial income every month. His investments had grown considerably. The company he had founded was still profitable. And there was something else my father had left me. Controlling ownership in the company, I wasn't simply inheriting money. I was inheriting responsibility. For the first time, I understood why Dad had kept everything secret. He didn't want wealth to change me. He wanted it to protect me from people who would try to change me. Meanwhile, Daniel became more demanding. One evening, he came home with a business proposal. "I need $200,000, he said. "For what? To save the company." I looked at him. "Why should I give you that much money because we're married?" "No," I replied quietly. "Because you believe you're entitled to it." His face hardened. "Don't start acting superior now." I almost laughed. The man who had called me useless was now asking me for hundreds of thousands of dollars. "I don't owe you my father's inheritance," I said. He froze. What inheritance? I realized immediately that he knew nothing. I told him I had received assets from my father, but I didn't tell him the full amount. Daniel's expression changed. Suddenly he was interested. "How much? That isn't your concern." He began searching for information. He contacted relatives. He asked questions. He even tried to pressure my father's lawyer, but the lawyer refused to disclose anything. Then came the day Daniel discovered the truth. He had been invited to a business event hosted by one of my father's former partners. When he arrived, he saw my name displayed on a large screen. New managing director and majority owner, Emily Robert. His face reportedly went pale. He called me immediately. "Emily, what's going on?" I was sitting in my father's old office. "I'm working. You own the company." "Yes, how much?" I didn't answer. "Emily, how much money did your father leave you?" I looked around the office. On the wall was a photograph of my father smiling beside the first machine he had ever purchased for his business. Then I remembered his words. "Some people will love you for who you are. Others will love what they think they can get from you. I don't think that's important anymore." I said. Daniel became furious. "You kept this from me. You never asked how I was doing after my father died." I replied. "You only asked how much money I received." He went silent. Then he tried another approach. "We're husband and wife. Everything should be shared." I shook my head. "Marriage means sharing love, trust, responsibility, and respect. It doesn't mean one person gets to insult the other and then demand their inheritance." For the first time, Daniel had nothing to say. I eventually filed for divorce. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, accusations, and attempts to make me feel guilty. But I refused to return to the woman I had been. I began working with my father's company. I learned everything from the employees who had known him for decades. I discovered that my father had built more than a business. He had built people's lives. Employees' children had gone to college because of him. Families had purchased homes because of stable jobs he created. That became my purpose. I didn't want to simply inherit my father's money. I wanted to continue his legacy. Months later, I stood in front of the company employees and announced a new scholarship program for their children. Everyone applauded, but I wasn't thinking about the applause. I was thinking about my father. He had once told me that wealth wasn't measured by what you owned. It was measured by what became better because you existed. Daniel eventually tried to come back. He sent messages saying he had changed. He apologized. He said he had been stressed. He said he never truly meant that I was useless. I believed that he regretted losing me, but I didn't believe he regretted how he treated me. There was a difference, so I closed that chapter of my life. Years later, I stood in the same kitchen where Daniel had once called me useless. Everything looked different, but the greatest change wasn't in the house. It was in me. I finally understood something. My father had tried to teach me all along. Your value isn't determined by someone's ability to recognize it. Sometimes the people closest to you will underestimate you because they become comfortable with your sacrifices. They mistake kindness for weakness, patience for helplessness, silence for ignorance, and sometimes the person who calls you useless is simply the person who has never taken the time to understand what you're capable of. Daniel thought I had nothing. He thought I needed him. He thought my quietness meant weakness. He was wrong. My father didn't just leave me money. He left me freedom. He left me responsibility. He left me a legacy, but most importantly, he left me the courage to finally understand my own worth. And that was worth more than anything money could buy.